Megiddo, 1457. BCE. Egypt crushes the Canaanite alliance in the first recorded chariot battle. In 1457 BCE, the land of Canaan burned beneath a sun as sharp as heated steel. Dust from the battlefield of Megiddo rose in thick clouds, and human history stood at one of its great crossroads. The moment when the earliest recorded war chariots thundered toward each other at merciless speed. When the power of Egypt under Pharaoh Thutmose III collided with the fierce resistance of the Canaanite coalition, Kadesh, Megiddo, and the shadowy influence of Mitanni looming behind them. This was not merely a battle, it was the opening bell of an age defined by chariot warfare, a moment when young civilizations were forced to choose between submission and annihilation. A small valley, yet heavy with destiny, where every crack of the whip could shift the balance of the entire Near East. And today, we return to that moment, to witness how Egypt did not simply fight a battle, but shattered a coalition, carving its name into history with blood and iron, and ushering in the era of Thutmose, the greatest warrior king ever to rise along the Nile. Thutmose III ascended the Egyptian throne at a time when few believed a young king could reshape the balance of power in the Near East. For years, his authority had been overshadowed by the immense legacy of Queen Hatshepsut. But when she died and real power finally returned to him, the world had already changed. In the north, rebellion flared like a desert storm. The Canaanite city-states, once loyal vassals of Egypt, were now drifting toward Mitanni, an expanding empire reaching its hand of influence deep into the Levant. Messengers rode ceaselessly back to Thebes bearing dire news. Kadesh, Megiddo, and numerous smaller kingdoms had forged an alliance to challenge Egypt's supremacy. They believed that an inexperienced young pharaoh could never extinguish a rising wave of resistance that surged like a flood. If this alliance succeeded, Egypt would lose tribute in cedar wood, copper, tin, war horses, and, more critically, the coastal trade routes that formed the lifeline connecting Egypt with Mesopotamia and Anatolia. In other words, Egypt stood on the brink of losing both its economic leverage and its political dominance. Thutmose III understood that this was no longer a border dispute. It was a test of survival for an entire empire. So he chose neither defense nor negotiation. He chose war, a campaign on a scale unseen since the days of the great pharaoh Thutmose I. He assembled more than 20,000 soldiers, infantry armed with leather shields, bronze-tipped spears, and composite bows of terrifying penetration, and charioteers, the elite of Egyptian warfare, riding lightweight wooden chariots with flexible spoked wheels, each one a deadly fusion of a horse's speed and an archer's lethal range. As the army rolled across Sinai, the ground trembled as if struck by 1,000 war drums. Columns of red dust rose behind the chariot squads, heralding a storm of power sweeping toward the Levant. Near Megiddo, 3 routes unfolded before Thutmose III. A northern arc, easy but long. A southern path, safer but expected by the enemy. And a narrow mountain pass called Aruna. Steep, twisting, and so perilous that a single ambush could annihilate the entire Egyptian force. The generals urged the king to avoid the Aruna Pass, but Thutmose knew that every strategic assumption of the Canaanite alliance rested on the belief that Egypt would choose the safe route. To win decisively, he had to strike where the enemy least expected. The decision fell like stone cutting through the wind. The entire army turned and marched toward Aruna, a gamble only a man who truly believed in his destiny would dare to make. The air grew thick, like the stillness before a storm. Every soldier understood they were entering a place where a single mistake could bring an empire crashing down. And it was here, as the wheels of the Egyptian chariots touched the narrow path of Aruna, that the fates of Canaan and Egypt began to intertwine in the clash of iron, opening the first chapter of a conflict that would shake the history of the Near East. When the last Egyptian chariot wheel emerged from the Aruna Pass and the morning light swept across the mountain ridge, Thutmose III realized his gamble had succeeded beyond all expectation. The Canaanite alliance had left the pass completely undefended. They were certain the young pharaoh would never risk an empire on a corridor as narrow as a blade. Thus, when the Egyptian army appeared before Megiddo, the enemy's entire defensive layout was misplaced, Troops scattered to the north and south while the center lay almost empty. Thutmose III seized the golden moment instantly. He deployed his forces with the speed of an unfurling war fan, dividing them into three great divisions: the left wing under the name of Amun, the right under the symbol of the sun god Ra, and the central force of Ptah charged with driving straight into the heart of the enemy line. Standards whipped in the wind, bronze trumpets thundered like war-calling storms, and thousands of soldiers advanced with a roar that beat like the heartbeat of an empire on the rise. By midday, the Battle of Megiddo erupted in full force. The Egyptian chariots, light, agile, each carrying a driver and an archer, charged like lightning, using their superior speed to sweep around the flanks of the still disordered Canaanite formation. Arrows fired from composite bows, 4 times stronger and faster than ordinary bows, punched through wooden shields as if stabbing into soft earth. The Canaanite coalition attempted a counterattack with their heavier armored chariots, rolling fortresses in motion, but their sheer weight made them slow to turn, turning them into perfect targets for Egypt's archers and chariot corps. The valley rang with the sounds of screaming horses, splintering wheels, and the crack of shattered wood echoing like thunder. By early afternoon, the Canaanite center collapsed entirely. Their ranks broke. Warriors abandoned their horses and fled toward the nearby groves, and the distant silhouette of Megiddo faded behind swirling red dust. In that moment, victory rested almost fully within Thutmose III's grasp. But then came Egypt's single fatal mistake. Instead of exploiting the golden moment for pursuit, many soldiers became absorbed in looting the enemy camp. Glittering spoils of gold, silver, armor, war horses, and provisions, disrupting the momentum of the assault. The Canaanite alliance seized that sliver of survival, retreating with their remaining troops into Megiddo and sealing the gates, turning a near-instant victory into a prolonged siege. Thutmose III now commanded the battlefield, but not the city. And that meant the battle was far from over. In fact, it was about to enter a far more grueling phase. The walls of Megiddo rose high and unyielding, like the final expression of Canaanite resistance. A heavy darkness of waiting settled over both sides. Egypt and its enemies alike understood that the next chapter would no longer be a clash of speed, but a contest of time, supplies, and sheer will to endure. The siege of Megiddo began like a second battle. Quieter, yet far more brutal than the morning's chariot clash. Because now the enemy no longer stood before Egyptian spears. They hid behind high walls, stored provisions, and clung to the fragile hope that Mitanni, the northern great power, would send an army to rescue them. If that happened, Egypt would be trapped between Megiddo's stone walls and a far stronger relief force, and the entire campaign could collapse in a single night. Thutmose III understood this danger better than anyone. He knew Megiddo had to fall quickly, but not through fire and frantic assaults. The city had to be worn down, isolated, its lifelines severed one by one, as if tightening a noose around its breath. And so, around Megiddo rose a second wall, built not of stone, but by Egypt itself. A ring of siege works so tight that not even a bird could slip through. No one in, no one out. Trade, water routes, and food supplies from the surrounding lands were completely severed. Egyptian soldiers set up camps of leather and wood, standing guard day and night, knowing that any sound in the darkness might signal a desperate breakout attempt from within. Time crawled on, weeks turning into months. Inside Megiddo, the first cries of starving children began to echo. Canaanite nobles argued as their granaries dried up like a river in drought. War horses, the pride of the coalition, were slaughtered for meat. Then seeds were eaten, then saddle leather, then whatever scraps remained. Items meant for battle now boiled simply to keep people alive. Outside the encircled walls, Thutmose III remained steadfast, a stone statue that could think, calculate, and wait. Envoys who once begged for aid from Kadesh and other city-states received no reply, for the petty kingdoms of the region, upon realizing that Egypt still stood firm and no reinforcements were coming, began to bow their heads to the pharaoh. They sent tribute, pled for forgiveness, and one by one shifted allegiance. The balance of power tipped gradually, not by a single decisive strike, but by the slow collapse of the coalition's morale. After 7 long months, the gates of Megiddo finally opened. Not because they had been breached, but because exhaustion had hollowed the defenders to their core. The leaders of Kadesh and their allies stepped out before the Egyptian camp, their heads covered in ash, their shoulders draped in torn garments, offering tribute and surrendering noble youths as hostages, the ultimate guarantee of their submission. Thutmose III accepted their surrender, not out of mercy, but as a sovereign establishing his new dominion over Canaan. He allowed the people of the city to live, but placed them under the watch of Egyptian garrisons, levied tribute in gold, silver, horses, and chariots, and, most importantly, secured control over the northern trade routes. From that moment on, Megiddo was no longer a fortress of rebellion, but a symbol of Egyptian might. News of the victory flashed back to Thebes like lightning splitting the sky. The young pharaoh was now celebrated as the ruler who not only crushed the Canaanite coalition, but also opened the era of northern hegemony. Yet this triumph was only the beginning. Thutmose III did not stop. His gaze stretched farther, to the land of Mitanni, where true power awaited him. And the next chapter of his campaign smoldered beneath the ashes of victory like embers waiting to ignite. The victory at Megiddo did not end in silence. It flung open a vast door that led Egypt into an era of unprecedented expansion. After receiving the submission of the Canaanite leaders, Thutmose III immediately established a network of vassal states. Each Canaanite city-state was required to send noble hostages and pay tribute in gold, silver, jewels, chariots, and most importantly, horses, the strategic resource that turned northern armies into thunder on the move. The coastal trade routes reopened under Egyptian protection. Cedar from Phoenicia, tin from Anatolia, fine textiles from distant lands, all flowed into Thebes like blood feeding the heart of an empire. But Thutmose understood that power endures only as long as fear remains. So he did not stop at Megiddo. He carved his name into history with 17 campaigns over more than 2 decades. Each campaign was a steel-hard proclamation to the north that Egypt had no rival. Each captured town, each fallen fortress was an echo of Megiddo repeated across the land of Canaan. Egyptian armies advanced to Tunip, Kadesh, and Ugarit, crushing sparks of rebellion and receiving the submission of vassal kings, extending their reach to the very borders of Mitanni, the true rival to Nile supremacy. Egyptian records note that the spoils brought back by Thutmose III were so vast that the treasury of Thebes had to build new storage vaults. The stone pillars of Karnak were carved with lists of subdued city-states stretching like the horizon itself, each name a stepping stone on the road to glory. Canaan's political landscape changed at its roots. No longer a contested buffer between great powers, it became an extension of Egypt, a province of influence. The sons of noble families were required to learn Egyptian, to reside in the royal court at Thebes as living guarantees of loyalty. And from this very generation, Egypt shaped a ruling class that governed Canaan according to its will. Not through iron chains, but through culture and soft power, soaking into the land like the Nile into its soil. Thutmose III was not only a warrior, but a shrewd administrator. He reformed the tax system in Canaan, appointed overseers, rewarded loyal city-states, and punished those who plotted revenge. In the years that followed, Egyptian armies continued their push northward, crossing the Orontes and pressing into territories under Mitanni influence, turning the Levant into a strategic corridor linking Egypt with the greater Eurasian world, where goods, culture, and ambition flowed like an ever-moving river. The prestige of Thutmose III spread far and wide, carved onto the walls of Karnak in inscriptions as deep as vows to history, declaring that Egypt had risen as the dominant power of the ancient East, and that Megiddo was only the opening chapter. Greater conquests lay ahead, distant battlefields where the wheels of Egyptian chariots would once again grind enemies into the desert dust. The war was far from over. Megiddo was only the beginning, the spark that sent the entire Near East trembling beneath the wheels of Egypt's chariots. And in that blaze of triumph, Thutmose III emerged not merely as a warrior, but as the man who reshaped the order of the world. If you want to follow the next campaigns, those crucial moments when Egypt finally clashes head-on with Mitanni, then don't step away from this journey. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episode, where blood, power, and ambition continue writing the blazing chapters of human history.